In Essential Task 6.3, we are going to talk about various parental influences, talking about attachment theory, and then talking about various parenting styles. I think horizontal works the best for this, though I think some of you might choose to do this one vertically. What you see here are two separate columns. The column on the left, though, has some divisions here below. The column on the right only is one individual box, but when you zoom into it, you'll notice that there are 4 vocabulary terms indicating the 4 different parenting styles here in the middle. I personally think horizontal works the best, but I could see many of you do this vertically. I could also see conceivably some of you choose to use a second piece of paper, have attachment sort of as a part A, and then parenting styles as a part B, because you run out of space or because you fear that you're going to run out of space. In either case, I think personally I would do this horizontally, but I could understand some of you choosing to do it vertically. I'll return, though, to the task text, allowing you to copy down the portion in yellow before we transition into the concept map. We'll start talking about parenting now, and start on the left talking about attachment. The term attachment itself just means an emotional connection with another person. We can use this term to describe adults in romantic relationships, though in the context of this unit, we are primarily going to be talking about attachment between a child and a caregiver. The first big study, or at least the study for our interest into attachment, was actually done not with people, but with monkeys. It was conducted by a gentleman named Harry Harlow in the famous Harlow monkey study. I would like you to watch the entirety of the clip here attached on Google Classroom. I think the study is best when you see it with the visual, so do please watch the clip. But what Harlow essentially did is he took monkeys, baby rhesus monkeys, as you see here, essentially from the moment of birth, and detached them from their mother, and then placed them into this enclosed area and gave them 2 options. Will they latch onto this surrogate fake mother, as you can see here in the picture above, that has this nice fuzzy fabric, or would they attach to the surrogate mother that provided them nutrients and food? What Harlow found is that these baby rhesus monkeys would spend all the way up to about 23 hours a day latched onto the fake surrogate mother that was providing them with that nice tactile contact, that fuzziness. Giving us the conclusion in the Harlow monkey study that infants bond with their mothers in this form of attachment, but it doesn't necessarily have to do because the mother provides nourishment. It's more based on the mother's tactile bodily contact, that touch is a massive component of the attachment that's formed between the caregiver and the child. So these rhesus monkeys were not attaching to that surrogate mother for nutrition, not at all. They were attaching to the surrogate mother that provided them with the best tactile, the best touch sensation. The term tactile in and of itself might be a term that we haven't used before, that you haven't seen before. The College Board has asked about this study using that term, so I do want to make sure that you're aware of that term tactile, in case you know what the study is, but you don't know how to translate it into a multiple choice question. Tactile means bodily, touch. When we talk about humans, though, we'll transition now to this bottom left part of the concept map. So there are 4 boxes here in this bottom left region, now that we've talked about Harlow's monkey study. We'll talk a little bit more about animals, actually, and then talk about humans. I would like you to watch, bare minimum, this clip here. I think it's the most memorable of the clips that I have here. Though you can absolutely watch these 2 optional clips as well. The one in the top right corner would be Konrad Lorenz himself. The one in the top left corner is just sort of a Looney Tunes comical visual of imprinting. Again, I would want you to watch at least the one here on the right. This one's a really fascinating example. So we've established this emotional bond between the caregiver and the child. What's fascinating is that some animals appear to have what are called critical periods for attachment during the early phases of life. And in some circumstances, these young infants, whether they're ducks or other animals, are actually going to be willing to form an attachment to just about anything that moves, which in some circumstances means that's not necessarily going to be their mother or their caregiver. Usually it is, but that's not necessarily always true. Konrad Lorenz stumbled upon a phenomenon that he called imprinting. Imprinting is precisely this idea that there are some animals that have a critical period. Critical period was a term that we encountered back in Unit 1. It basically means a special period, a special window of time during development where a certain skill or behavior must or is going to be developed. In the case of the animals that Lorenz studied, he found that there was a critical period, a window of time, essentially right after birth, in which some animals are going to form an attachment to the closest object or person or animal that moves. Do watch this clip here in the right corner. You will see a duck attach itself to, of all things, a cat, and essentially follow the cat around as if the cat is its mother. This phenomenon of imprinting is quite memorable when you actually see, because it basically involves a baby animal following around who they perceive to be their caregiver. More often than not, that actually is the mother. But again, as I alluded to, sometimes that's not always the case. So when I look at the word imprinting, I think of the phrase footprints, or the term footprints. If you do in fact go ahead and watch these clips as I'm asking you to do, you will definitely see that idea of being followed, or the footsteps behind the caregiver. So that's animals. Now we're going to transition now to people. We'll first here talk about what's called the strange situation, a study conducted by key psychologist Mary Ainsworth. Ainsworth is very frequently on the AP exam. Her work is really fascinating and is still to this day being researched in more depth. What Ainsworth identified were different forms of what she called attachment: secure attachment, insecure attachment, and then something called disorganized attachment. And then from that point, some of these are broken down a little bit more, as we'll talk about in a few moments. But what she found is that young babies form various forms of attachment to their caregiver, most typically their mother. And depending on what type of attachment they form at this young age, I mean, we're talking less than a year old or a year old, that attachment at such a young age actually predicts future behavior quite well. There are some correlations that do a decent job predicting future behavior. Now, as we know, correlation is not causation, but correlation nevertheless allows us to make predictions about the future. While certain forms of attachment, especially the insecure attachment, correlate to some fairly undesirable qualities as an adult, some fairly undesirable characteristics, which makes her research quite profound. Just to set up the strange situation, I am going to ask you to watch about a 3-minute clip showing you what this looks like, but just to set it up for you. Essentially, it starts like this. Young child and the mother are playing in a brand new room with brand new toys in a brand new environment. The mother is asked to leave the room. She is signaled by the researcher and she leaves the room. The vast majority of the time, the child alone in this unknown room with unknown toys is going to become distressed. They're going to cry. They're going to holler for their mother, whatever it might happen to be. The question here is, though, what is going to happen when the mother returns to the room? Is the child going to calm down? Is the child going to keep crying? Is the child going to become avoidant? That is precisely the question that Ainsworth and her fellow researchers have been asking, and they have utilized this strange situation in order to determine the answer to that. Well, when Ainsworth conducted her work, she found that about 60% of children exhibit what's called secure attachment. So just to give you a heads up, a little bit of a preview of this corner, we're now with the 2 boxes here at the bottom. So again, this is the majority. This is 60% of children. You must absolutely watch about the first 2 minutes of the clip attached here. And again, it's also on Google Classroom. It is essential to see what this looks like. But when children exhibit secure attachment, the mother leaves, the child becomes distressed, so they cry, as you'll see in the clip. The mother returns, but the child then stops crying and is clearly happy, wants to be picked up, seeks out their mother as a reliable source of security. And to be quite honest, that is the more desirable attachment. Children that are securely attached are more likely to, at least just with correlation, and correlation is not causation, but there are correlations that suggest that those children, even though this secure attachment is exhibited at a young age, are going to grow up to be more self-reliant, have higher self-esteem. I'm just going to say desirable social skills. There are some correlations regarding IQ scores. So there really are a desirable series of correlations connected to securely attached children, even at this very young age. Just to be clear, the box here at the top says secure. Make sure that you know that means secure attachment or securely attached. That word attachment would be connected to the end of this. The other end of the spectrum, I don't want this to seem like the end all be all, is insecure attachment. So if someday you're a parent and you feel like your child exhibits insecure attachment, I don't want you to somehow think you're a failure as a parent or that's the end all be all. We're just looking at some correlational research. And some of you might be curious, there is a little bit of a gap here. 60 plus 30 is only 90. 10% are what we just call disorganized or disoriented, a form of attachment that doesn't necessarily fit one or the other perfectly, so it's sort of in the middle. But when you talk about insecure attachment, there are really 2 different types of insecure attachments that have been discovered: avoidant and then anxious, ambivalent, some people call resistant. We're going to start with avoidant. So same scenario. Child is in the room. Mother is in the room, mother leaves, child is distressed, mother returns. When a child is avoidant, they exhibit this clear behavioral pattern of shifting off to the side, giving their mother the cold shoulder, avoiding their mother, not wanting to be picked up. It's really fascinating here because the child cried because their mother was gone. Yes, the child has more often than not stopped crying upon the return of their mother, but instead of seeking out their mother to be hugged, instead of seeking out their mother for that reliability, the child is avoidant. This is more likely if the mother is insensitive or unresponsive, meaning this child might be at home crying for hours and hours and hours and never really get any response. So now all of a sudden, in the strange situation, the mother comes back to the room and the child doesn't really know how to react. The child, for all of their life, has sort of been ignored during these time periods. They've been unresponsive. So it's kind of unusual, that interaction, when you see a child who's avoidant. Watch from about 150 to 240 in the clip here in the top left corner. You'll see precisely what avoidant attachment looks like. The other one is what we call anxious, ambivalent, or resistant. This is more likely when the mother's nurturing is inconsistent, meaning sometimes when the child is in need, the mother is there. Other times, not so much. It's very inconsistent. The child doesn't know reliably whether or not their mother is going to be a secure base. As a result, children who are anxious, ambivalent, or resistant put into the scenario, mom leaves, child's distressed, mom returns, the child is mad. The child won't stop crying, which again is really fascinating. The reason the child began crying in the first place was because mom left. Children who are anxious, ambivalent, or exhibit this anxious, ambivalent, or resistant attachment just don't stop crying. So they'll have the mother pick them up and hold them and try and console them, and they'll just keep crying and crying and crying. Avoidant and anxious, ambivalent / resistant are two examples of insecure attachment. So again, this is the minority case. You do not see as many cases of this, but these are both classified as insecure attachments. Please watch from 240 to the end, which is about 330. That way you will have seen secure attachment, avoidant attachment, and then this anxious, ambivalent / resistant attachment. And the commentary is really fantastic for all three of those as well. So now we're going to transition to the remaining portion of today's concept map under the category of parenting styles. This is another key psychologist, Diana Baumrand. Her work is actually quite fascinating because this is the second time we've referenced her. She was the individual that wrote that scathing critique of Stanley Milgram back in Unit 3. We briefly read her perspective of why Milgram's study on obedience was unethical and harmful. Well, nevertheless, she has another contribution, and quite frankly, if you see her name on the AP exam, it's going to be because of the parenting styles that she identified. She identified 4 separate parenting styles and then identified some different behaviors that those parenting styles correlate to, meaning if you grow up in a household where your parents exhibit, whether it's authoritative, permissive, authoritarian, or neglectful, these are some potential correlations to look out for. We'll start all the way on the left with authoritative, and I'll zoom in to make this a little bit easier for you. We'll start here on the left. You can put these on top of one another. They don't necessarily need to be left to right, as I have. So whatever works the best for you. But we're going to start with authoritative. Authoritative, we're going to start with the parenting style that is most desirable, meaning it correlates to the most desirable future behaviors. And when we're talking about correlations here, we're talking about behavioral patterns of the child. So a child who grows up in a demanding but responsive parenting environment, meaning there's expectations. You do your homework, you do the chores, you keep your grades up, you potentially get a job, that there is this high demands but high responsiveness. Those children are more likely to grow up with high self-esteem, high self-reliance, reliability at work, just general good positive social skills. I mean, we're talking about a series of very desirable correlations. Again, and these are families that live in authoritative households, where their parents have high demands but are incredibly reasonable. So if you come to them and you say, listen, I really can't do that this weekend. I have a big project coming up. Can I rake the leaves next weekend? These parents are more than likely going to acquiesce and accept the reality and say, yeah, let's come up with some type of reasonable game plan to get this done. As a mnemonic, when I look at the IVE at the end of authoritative, I think of the word responsive. This mnemonic is critical because in a little bit, we're going to talk about authoritarian parenting styles. And I cannot tell you how often these two are confused with one another. So having a mnemonic that is this reliable, I think is very valuable. I would watch the entirety of this clip. Each of the clips coming up are all about 1 or 2 minutes long, and they are perfect examples of these parenting styles. The second parenting style, though, is what we call permissive. These are parents that have no demands at all. You can do whatever you want, but then are also highly responsive. So this is one of those parents that will do anything for their child without any repercussions, allow them to throw house parties, allow them to do whatever they want, and provide them with whatever they can. Children that grow up in a permissive parenting household are more likely going to exhibit immaturity as they age because they've never really had that back and forth expectation that you might see in an authoritative parenting environment. So we have two parenting styles here, authoritative and permissive, that are both highly responsive. So they're always there for their child, but one has high demands, authoritative, one has low demands, permissive. The other end of the spectrum are authoritarian parents and neglectful parents. We'll start with authoritarian parents. Authoritarian parents are parents who are highly, highly demanding and expect obedience. So if you ask them, hey, can I break their leaves next weekend? I kind of have something coming up. The answer is probably going to be no. The expectation is these are the rules. You're going to do them. You're the child. I'm the parent. That's how it is. Children that live through this authoritarian style of parenting tend to grow up and have much better self-control. They tend to be more obedient towards their superiors, whether that's a boss or somebody else, which in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, but there are also some undesirable with social skills as a result of authoritarian parenting environments. As a mnemonic, and I'm going to caution with this mnemonic, if you believe your parents are classified as any of these, particularly this one, don't take my mnemonic and then use it as a way of sort of commenting to your parents that your AP Psych teacher is using mean terminology towards them. Again, this is just a mnemonic. But when you see the word authoritarian, if you have familiarity with history, figures like Stalin and Mussolini were technically classified as authoritarian. So if high demands and harsh and obedient works for you because you have that historical background, use it. If not, the word draconian ends in IAN, same thing with authoritarian, and you can use that as a mnemonic. But one way or another, you need to be able to differentiate between authoritative, which is demanding but reasonable, and authoritarian, demanding, not so reasonable. The last one is neglectful. This is a parent that is not responsive with very little demands. I mean, it really is what it sounds like, a parent who is truly, truly neglectful. So they're not there when the child needs them. There's no expectations. If you watch the clip here at the bottom right corner, you will definitely see neglectful parenting. This will correlate to things like delinquency. I will end this by showing you a visual here at the bottom that I really like to use to capture these four parenting styles. So I really would like you to copy this down into your concept map if you have space. So the first spectrum is high response, low response. So parent who's there all the time, parent who's not there really ever. Then we have highly demanding, no demands. While in the top right corner is the most desirable of each of these, an authoritative parent, a parent who is highly responsive, always there for their child, but is also highly demanding. The top left corner is a permissive parent, meaning there's no demand, so the demand spectrum is low, but is highly responsive. The bottom right corner is authoritarian, highly demanding. These are the rules, and you're going to do them. You're the child, I'm the parent, that's how it goes. Low responsiveness. And then there's neglectful, low demands, and low response. Occasionally, some people will use the word warmth when describing this. So instead of high response, they'll say high warmth versus low warmth. That's another way of thinking about this. But these are the four parenting styles and some of their corresponding correlations. And again, if you haven't already done so, do stop to watch these four clips. They are perfect encapsulations of Barman's four parenting styles.